I would argue that the reason Jamie Dimon doesn't like, or publicly says he doesn't like Bitcoin, is because he is so into the idea of programmable, surveillable money. In a way, I mean, maybe he wants to, change his tune on Bitcoin as it relates to it being like for asset storage, now that people like Larry Fink have come out and embraced it. But remember, Larry Fink too was against Bitcoin a few years ago. And then obviously has adopted a very different tone since then. And I think that's going to be true of really all of these Wall Street figures that in past years have been very negative about Bitcoin.
In this recent interview on What Bitcoin Did with Whitney Webb, we learn about powerful players in the financial industry and their drive that could potentially push Bitcoin or destroy Bitcoin. At the time of this discussion, Bitcoin is trading at $63,000 with a 1% decrease change in the last 24 hours and 10% increase change in the last 7 days. Whitney Webb dives into the intricate web of influential figures like Larry Fink and Jamie Dimon, exploring their potential impact on Bitcoin's future. She discusses the complex relationships between major financial institutions, government agencies, and cryptocurrency markets, shedding light on the hidden agendas that may shape the digital currency landscape. Webb's insights reveal the delicate balance between Bitcoin's decentralized nature and the centralized power structures seeking to control or benefit from it. Before we dive into this discussion, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this channel. Now let's hear more from Whitney Webb.
So think about someone like Larry Fink, who's on record saying markets like totalitarian governments. It's because there's way less risk when the government is totalitarian and authoritarian. And so it's better for someone like Larry Fink because they can make money when there's less risk, right? And they know how to trade stuff and buy what and whatever. And a lot of that is through this symbiosis with the public sector. That is why Larry Fink is like one of the main champions of stakeholder capitalism and all this stuff. It's because it's good business for him, but it's bad for freedom. But JP Morgan, has done a lot on like deposit tokens or tokenized deposits, they're sometimes called, and is likely to, they've made like JP Morgan coin. It's done like an insane amount of money in terms of like the total amount of transactions it's overseen and just like, or been involved in just like a few years and things like that. And we'll see, but he's definitely not adverse to a lot of these movements that are happening in fintech and in the interests of, some of these either governments or intelligence agencies and what have you, or the UN or any of these other groups, and seeing, most of the world, if not all the world, adopt some form of programmable, surveillable currency, which is essentially what the CBDC is, and why CBDCs have been so criticized is because they're programmable and surveillable, not necessarily because it's issued by a central bank, because, fiat is issued by a central bank. Like that, as I understand it, isn't so much the issue around CBDCs. It says they're programmable and surveillable. Okay, so maybe the government isn't doing the programming and the surveilling, but is JP Morgan doing it and then passing off all that information to the government that team up with all the time anyway? Is it really any that better in practice? I don't think so. And then again, as we mentioned earlier, people like John Reed that helped build up this industry have been like, financial surveillance like is the best. Like these are people that are all in to surveil you and collaborate with the people that helped get them in the positions of power they are now. And help, facilitate that type of end game that we're all rapidly being hurtled towards,
And as we just heard Whitney Webb discuss Bitcoin's powerful corrupted players, let's hear her explain more about companies like Endeavor and the risk around CBDCs and digital ID. Webb highlights the concerning connections between major financial institutions and their involvement in shaping digital currencies. She points out how companies like Endeavor, with ties to influential figures in both the public and private sectors, are positioning themselves to potentially control or influence the future of digital finance. Webb emphasizes the risks associated with central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and digital ID systems, warning that they could lead to increased surveillance and loss of financial privacy. She argues that these developments could pose a significant threat to the decentralized and pseudonymous nature of Bitcoin. Now, let's listen to what Whitney Webb on the What Bitcoin Did podcast has to say about Endeavor and CBDCs.
Sure. So, Endeavor is sort of, I would see them as an outgrowth of some of these earlier entities that sort of did similar things. So in our last article, Debt from Above, we talked about the Club of Rome because there were connections. the Green Plus program we were looking at there to the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome really started through this group called ADELA, which is an acronym, and it was backed by like the Rockefeller family and a lot of these titans of industry, mainly in Western Europe and North America. And their focus was to basically develop the corporate and economic landscapes of Latin America. And so essentially what they would do is they would choose, the companies that they wanted to be successful, and they would, just give them an insane amount of capital based on the context of the country they're in. So there's no really like other competitors that can match that level of capital that's being injected into these specifically chosen companies. And so those companies rise to the top of the heap, and then those people become like local oligarchs essentially, but they owe their newfound power and influence to the people that finance them. And so if, let's say, those people that, from the West, the Rockefeller family, for example, want a particular policy implemented in Latin America, or want, a favor, are those people going to say no? I think it's rather unlikely, right? And so the powerful networks, in the West were doing that in Latin America a long time ago. And what's disturbing is that, those same people at Adela, like the Rockefellers and the people that went on to fund the Club of Rome, have been big promoters, for example, of deindustrializing and depopulating Latin America. By creating instability and creating all sorts of, other issues or policies, having them implemented across the continent. And it was actually a national security memorandum authored by Kissinger that essentially said the same thing and framed it as as a national security threat. So, we have to consider that this kind of stuff, Adela had lots of positive PR at the time, and in Time magazine, for example, and other outlets talking about how they were doing great things for Latin American businesses. And so when you look at a group like Endeavor, I'm sure it is framed as positive throughout South America. But the problem is that the people that developed Endeavor, including Rottenberg and Kellner, they have ties that are, as we document in the piece, are of concern. And the people that essentially supercharged Endeavor by giving them millions upon millions of dollars to become what they are now are definitely very disturbing figures, mainly Piero Midyar of eBay and the Bronfman family, who, have all sorts of ties to, some of it we've already gone over, but there's definitely a lot more to be said about both of them. And if you look at a lot of, philanthropies in general, you will see that a lot of these very controversial oligarchs, are very interested in funding young global leaders. I say that because, of course, the WEF, World Economic Forum Young Global Leader Program, sort of became infamous in the past few years because of, WEF, the outgoing chairman of the WEF, Klaus Schwab, saying on video that, like, the Young Global Leader Program is so great because, we penetrate the cabinets. And, a lot of people pointed to that as being why, during COVID, all these young global leaders were in all these different cabinets throughout the world. And that was why, one of the reasons perhaps why so many countries adopted the same exact stance and policies as it related to COVID-19. And Endeavor is a similar network. A lot of the people involved in creating it, also young WEF, young global leaders. So is Wences Casares. And, these people aren't just in the public sector, they're also in the private sector. And Endeavor focuses expressly on the private sector in emerging markets, which, as we've discussed, earlier, there's a major interest to have Latin America completely dependent on, the United States, and have it be, financially yoked to the United States, and have its, resources are, belong to the United States. I mean, there's people, in power who have essentially said that, maybe a little more indirectly, in the past. I'm pretty sure John Bolton, for example, who was Trump's national security advisor and is a very, very much disliked neocon, has, quotes to that effect about, like, Latin America's ours, basically. And so, there's efforts to sort of make that happen. And I would argue that Endeavor is a way to sort of develop these corporate landscapes in a way similar to Adela, and to make it look decentralized in name only. But they share a lot of the same funding, and they share a lot of the same connections. And when those powerful people at the top come to call to those entrepreneurs, they can be influenced. And I would argue again that perhaps the most important point here is that the main Endeavor-backed companies, a lot of them are based around Endeavor Argentina specifically, are becoming the dominant platforms for e-commerce and fintech and crypto use, and also Bitcoin use, obviously, on the continent, especially at a time when this, what I would argue is an engineered economic crisis in places like Argentina, decades in the making, are forcing people onto these platforms, and they're you had someone like Malay elected expressly because he's like, I'm going to dollarize, and maybe he's not now, but stablecoins are a way to sort of get that, and these are the dominant force here as it relates to crypto payment rails. So much of it is based around Mercado Libre, which is like the e-commerce giant of the entire continent, and was one of the first Endeavor-backed companies in 1999. And you have Marcos Galperin being a big figure, but his co-founder at Mercado Libre created Kazakh Ventures, which is he made with another Endeavor entrepreneur, and they've gone to fund thousands of startups. And you're all of these companies, a lot of time, it's just business sense. You're beholden to your funding a lot of the time because you don't want to lose that funding.
As we conclude hearing Whitney Webb, her insights into the power dynamics surrounding Bitcoin and the broader financial system are both enlightening and concerning. She exposes the intricate connections between major financial players, government agencies, and emerging technologies that could reshape our monetary landscape. We would love to hear your thoughts on some questions. How can individuals protect their financial sovereignty in the face of powerful institutions seeking to control digital currencies? What role should regulators play in balancing innovation with consumer protection in the cryptocurrency space? Thank you for tuning in to Only the Savvy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, like, and share our video for more engaging content, diving into the innovative world of decentralized technologies.